Hello and welcome to this webinar today. It's more than just phishing, how to supercharge your security awareness training. My name is Javvad Malik. I'm a security awareness advocate for KnowBe4. I've been working in cybersecurity, IT security, information security, data, whatever you want to call it, for my entire career. I work for KnowBe4, the world's largest security awareness training and simulated phishing platform provider. You can find out more about us at knowbe4.com. So let's jump straight into it. And one of the things that's really I want to talk about is, well, these three parts. There's the brand, the approach, and the culture. And I think it's important to just frame the conversation in the way that many times we see people trying to do some sort of security awareness training, and it's either an annual exercise once a year. Someone will walk into a presentation room and deliver an hour's worth of content and walk out, and that's the end of it. Or it will just be some phishing emails that we will send, and we will expect people to just learn from that. But the reality is that it's quite different from that. So let's focus on these three aspects, and then we can delve into some of the details. I always think it's worthwhile starting with a thought-provoking quote. If you can't find a Sun Tzu quote, just find any quote. So, what got you here won't get you there, and I think that's very true of where we are in the security world. The threats, as we know, are continuously changing. It's almost like a game of whack-a-mole. So, we need to be mindful of the approaches that maybe we were taking that were effective 5 years ago, 10 years ago, won't really be effective today and tomorrow, especially as the digital world has really changed around us. So let's talk about brand. And by brand, I mean the brand of the security department or the security team, and how that is actually perceived within the organization within which you operate. And I went out and I spoke to a few security experts, friends who I know, and I asked them, like, what do you think? How do you think the security teams are broadly perceived? Rowena Fielding gave this quote. It's said that, we often in the industry use a lot of militarized or conflict-based language, and that is not conducive to fostering a spirit of collaboration. And I think she's right on the money with that. It's really easy to put people off when we walk in thinking like we're the drill master sergeant from Full Metal Jacket. Mo Amin said, if you have to say no, offer an alternative. And this all boils down to the whole concept of the Department of No. Are you going to be known as the Department of No, or are you going to be something else? Ed Tucker says, engage with your comms team and let them lead, because we pretty much are terrible at delivering messaging to the broader community. So I think first impressions are really, really important. They definitely do count. And I say that because think about what the average user, employee's interaction with security is. What is their first impression? Is it a boring lecture that they're given on the first day during their induction week, and it's just overwhelmed with information, and here's the security policy, and this is what we expect you to do, a whole list of do's and don'ts, and see you later? Or maybe the first time they ever interact with security department is when they fail a simulated phishing test, or they need something and the security team says no, or you're being stupid. And there's an example that I really like. It's they surveyed a bunch of people that stayed at a particular hotel, and they went through different experience, like on a scale of 0 to 10, how good was the food, how good was your room, how good was, all that kind of stuff. And that what they found is that staying in the same hotel, people that had a good check-in experience, if their check-in experience scored higher, like a 7, 8, or 7 to 10, then everything else would be bumped up higher on average. And if their check-in experience was poor, everything else would be rated poorer. And so that first impression really does have an impact. So even though everything else was exactly the same, the food was the same, the rooms were the same, everything was the same quality, people perceived that, took that first impression onwards, and let it go on. I think the second thing that's important is that security awareness, while it sits within the cybersecurity or IT security team, and that normally sits within IT, it's not it's not always a good idea to use the same metrics or try to use the same approach to report what you're doing in the same way that IT teams does, because simply like you can patch a machine and you can say, well, we've got like 30 machines or 30% are fully patched now, and that's done and dusted. Humans don't work in the same way. You can't just say we've patched or made them aware of something. Um, a good example of why you need to sometimes think in different ways is, say, Coke, for 100 years, being the top selling soft drink maker. If you want to compete with them, you say, let's make it taste nicer, make it cheaper, sell it in a bigger bottle. Who could disagree with that logic? However, the closest competitor in the last few decades that has taken more market share from Coke. They haven't obviously dominated the market. Coke is still the world leader, but tastes horrible, costs more, and comes in a tiny can. That's right, it's Red Bull. So sometimes you don't need to actually use the same metrics or the same measures. Sometimes you have to use something completely different. The other thing is like provide the right information. Oftentimes, IT teams are very focused on providing more information, better information, and providing it faster, better, cheaper, all that kind of things. So that's how they want their processes to work. But that's not always the case. Sometimes just providing the right information without speeding up or optimizing anything else is good enough. When Transport for London on the tubes, they started, and on the buses, they started putting these digital displays. Um, Customer satisfaction went up, not because trains were running any faster or better, or they were less crowded or smelly, but they knew when to expect the next train and where it was going to. And I think uh, putting things into context is super important. If you're trying to measure your security awareness plan with your patching or your multi-factor authentication rollout, you're kind of comparing apples to oranges. So frame it in the right reference so that people understand what your objectives are and what you're trying to achieve. I love this picture. It's like that squiggle in the middle. It could be a B or it could be the number 13, depending on whether there's letters on either side or numbers on either side of it. So framing things in the right context, providing the right information can and maintaining a good brand can be an important first step. Secondly, I think the approach is super important. I love this quote: "A flower is a weed with a marketing budget." What we tend to do is if people don't respond well to our once a year training, we think, well, the answer is more training. So we will start bombarding them with more and more training to the point where someone just eventually flips over the table and says, we can't handle it anymore, go away. So this is where I think it's really, really important to stop thinking like a trainer and start thinking more like a marketer. And there's an important distinction between training material and awareness material. And training is something that's very, very specific to achieve a specific task, and that's something, a skill you want people to learn, or some understanding you want them to gain. And awareness is not so specific, but it's more broad brush, and it just raises the questions and builds more of a framework. And I would argue that training is something we need a little bit of, focused on specific threats that are relevant to your organization. And what we need is more of the broader awareness, which is more engaging content, more interesting content. It's not necessarily there's no quiz at the end of it. It's not mandatory necessarily, but you raise it like that. The example I often give is you can watch a program like Top Gear, and that's awareness. It's awareness of cars. And they'll give you some information in there, but you're not really there for the information. You don't really care how many horsepower a certain car has. You want to see how far they can drift it round a corner without the tires catching fire. Training, on the other hand, is you have a very specific car. There's a specific type of tire on it. How do you change the wheel on it? And for that, you'll go to YouTube or whatever you can say, I have this brand of wheel, this brand of nut, this brand of car. How do I change the tire? And there'll be a very specific video, and that's training. So understand the difference between the two and use them accordingly. I think less training, like more focused training. Don't try to bombard them with too much training, but more general awareness. And ultimately, what that does is it gives people that framework to say that this doesn't feel right. I should ask someone about it. And that's all we're asking. We're not trying to make people security experts. We're just trying to get them to say, "I got a bad feeling about this." Um, The Inside Man is a show that we produce at Know Before. There's 3 seasons out at the moment, and it is very much one of those awareness thing. You watch it, it's almost like a Netflix show, but it's a really good example of something that you can make something that's a drama. It's watchable, it's bingeable. You can watch the whole first season in like an hour and a half, and you'll be entertained. And at the same time, you might think back and say, "Oh, there was some learning in it as well." And I think that's a really good example of something that is training. I think it's important to to be very good storytellers in that regard. Simply giving facts to people is one thing. They'll it's just a bit like when you're driving and you see a road sign that says the speed limit is 30. You're like, okay, thank you for that. But that doesn't really tell a story. It doesn't really get you to change your behaviors. So when we take that time to communicate with employees or colleagues, we should think about how we're building that story and that narrative. Because when you tell someone a story, their brain is actually editing the story as you speak. So if you say Goldilocks was walking into the woods, had the basket, her heart was thumping, she was really scared, her mother told her about wolves in the forest, and all of a sudden in your mind you'll start editing what that looks like, and there's a certain tempo and pace. And I think tapping into that skill is important when you're communicating with colleagues. Um, there's sometimes we focus on the objective reality too much, which is how many people can we train, how many phishing emails can we send, how many times can we beat people over the head, how many quizzes can we get people to ace, and sometimes that's not as important as the subjective experience, which is just how do people feel about things, and if they feel good about things, they would invest more and they would do better in things. So the one of the good examples is like, if you're flying on an aeroplane, would you be happier if your journey time was cut short by half hour in the air, or would you be happier if your check-in process was smoother, your immigration was smoother, and maybe you had 2 inches of extra leg room, or you would offered a complimentary drink, an extra complimentary drink? And I think those sorts of things can improve the subjective experience of people without necessarily making the plane faster, which could be unfeasible, not feasible. And it's about getting people into a better subjective experience. And so I think we need to think about that when rolling out a security training or awareness campaign. Are we actually just bumping up numbers, or are we trying to make it better and easier for people to engage? On that, perceptions really do matter, and sometimes you might have seen the weather forecast, and it says like, oh, it's 22 degrees outside, but or 24 degrees, but it feels like 22. And why does that happen? Science has measured the temperature. It says it's 24. Why is there any room for margin for error? And there shouldn't be, but it also recognizes that people feel their perceptions actually make a difference. So the weather person can tell me all day long that it's 24. If I feel like no, it's 22, it's 22. So I think that's an important thing to see. So just saying this is the right thing to do, this is the wrong thing to do, and trying to beat people over the head with facts all the time, it won't always get the job done. Uh, People also don't like to be treated like idiots, and we're very good in security historically at treating people like idiots. Betty Crocker learnt that lesson when they came up with their first cake mix, where you have a cake mix, you add water, put it in the oven, and it makes you a perfect cake. But they couldn't sell it because I think psychologically people felt like it was a bit of cheating. There seemed no effort. You just put water into mix and you bake it. So they changed it. And they said, now you add the water and you add 2 eggs. And suddenly it was flying off the shelves because now it felt like, hey, I am doing an element of cooking. I'm sourcing my own organic free range eggs and I'm cracking them with my own 2 hands, putting them in there, disposing of the shells. And that's why the cake is so good, because of all the effort I put in. So sometimes overly spoon feeding people can be a bad thing. And we need to think about how do we make something slightly more challenging and get them involved. This is something that video game makers have known for years. They don't make every level the same level of difficulty. They start off easy to get you used to the controls and the game, and then they make it harder and harder and harder. And that's what gives that continual sense of satisfaction and achievement. Finally, I think culture is a concept that is spoken about an awful lot. And I'm not going to go into the theory of the culture, but here's a few tips on how you can embed a better security culture within your organization. And one of the first things I love is when you can get some execs on board and they can share some stories. They can say about how they were fished or they were nearly fished, or how they received a phone call and they thought it was a CEO and they were about to transfer them, or they did transfer them some money. And not only does this bring a human face to the security messages, but it also makes it very relatable. And people are like, oh, this humanizes the topic. If they can fall for it, we can fall for it. If they can talk about it, we can talk about it. Create leverage by finding people within your organization that have a natural affinity towards security, and creating a champions program. So make them your champions, make them your eyes and ears on the ground in the departments. And you know, sometimes people locally within the team, they can explain the message far better than you and I ever could. Uh, Also look at other avenues that you can utilize. Designated driver was a concept that was in collaboration with behaviour scientists. Anti-drink drive campaigns had drawn up, and then they worked with Hollywood screenwriters to embed the concept into TV shows and movies. So then, all of a sudden, when you're going out with friends, it's a known concept and it doesn't feel awkward. People are like, hey, we know about this designated driver concept. I'm not going to drink all night because I'm the designated driver to make sure everyone gets home safely. And if Brad Pitt can do that, so can I. Restaurants are really good where they can offer complimentary desserts to a small group. Say there's a couple sitting next to a large table. If you offer the couple complimentary desserts, normally that will get the large table interested, and they'll say, we'll have that as well. So you suddenly got a lot of sales. So sometimes promoting people and saying, look at what a great job they done, rather than the opposite, which we tend to do historically, shaming people. But if you promote people, that can have a really positive knock-on effect. And the other thing is like trying to build systems that offer good choices. Like have a good choice architecture there. When you go to a restaurant, you ask for water. The waiter will inevitably ask, "Would you like it still or sparkling?" And you say, "Well, okay, I actually wanted tap water, but I'll go for still now." So these are kind of choices we want to try and encourage people to make good risk decisions. So that's something that's not just about awareness, but how we design our systems and the menus and the options that we provide them. I love this chart. It's by explanations. It's like the curb cut effect. If you integrate a drop curb for wheelchair users, you actually make the lives of many people far better. So I think this is something we often forget in security, that our objective isn't just to make security better, but is to make the whole organization and the lives of everyone a lot better. So with that, I think if there were three things I would leave you with to try and take your security awareness to the next level, or to try and think beyond just the simulated phishing campaigns and trying to measure them, which are all important, but it's not enough. I'd say uh, speak to your internal comms, marketing people. Say this is what messages we're trying to deliver. Can you help us with the language or what's appropriate and not? And sometimes you can find some really good people who can help you out. Build a security champions program within your organization. Find people who don't work in the security team who are interested in security, get them on board and get them to help out. And finally, take a look at all the information that you're providing and split them out into this is training material and this is awareness material. Look at the training material really critically and only deliver those things that are very relevant and very specific to your organization. The rest you can swap out for more awareness, and that will help build the general awareness and culture, hopefully, within your organization. So with that, I'd like to thank you so much for your time and attention. I hope you have a wonderful day. My details are there on screen, so if you want to get in touch with me, you're more than welcome to. Thank you and goodbye.